Hey, I'm Warren Sprouse. This is the Bible Forum. You're with me. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We just look at life through a biblical lens. We try to solve all the world's problems in 2 hours or less. I wanted to give you some biblical background on what's going on politically. We have some events that occur in the Middle East, and they are rumbling. They echo Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, the prophet Ezekiel talking about end time scenarios. What's going to happen before Jesus returns? And we all know about 666, and we all know about the Antichrist and some of those things. But there's a lot of details in here. And God has woven them through the passages of Scripture, not putting them out in a narrative form, but almost as a hunt and peck, see what you can learn as you put them all together. Let me give you some background. We're going to be talking about the events over in Turkey and Russia and some Libya and Israel and some of these things. But I want to go back to March of 1957. On the 25th of March, there were two treaties signed, and it's interesting to me that they were signed in Rome. These treaties gave birth to what we call the European Union. In those days, it was called the European Economic Community. The second treaty was the European Atomic Energy Community. They are referred to simply as the Treaties of Rome. The treaties were ratified by national parliaments of France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Italy, and Germany. And they all took time, obviously. We've gone through parliaments, but over the following months they came into force, culminating with January 1st, 1958. The treaty establishing the EEC, this is the one that has to do with the atomic energy, affirmed in its preamble that the signatory states were, quote, determined to lay the foundations of an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe. In this way, the member states specifically affirmed the political objective of a progressive political integration. About 30 years later, another document was signed to signal the successful completion of that treaty. It too was signed in Rome. The Bible, in its prophetic words, speaks of a Western leader who arrives on the scene at the end of the age to ostensibly take charge of the chaos that is then plaguing the Western world. He is characterized as riding on a white horse, hence the idea of a false Christ. This is in the early chapters of the book of the Revelation. He is coming into the scenario after the rapture of the church. This is an event the Bible does not actually specifically point to and say, here it is, this is when it's going to happen, kind of a thing. But there is certainly enough information in the Bible to indicate that this kind of thing does happen. One large indicator is the fact that throughout the book of the Revelation of Jesus Christ, there is no church. There's no mention of a church. There's no mention of worship as a church would do it. Christians are just not there. But if you can imagine several millions of people simply disappearing in a moment of time throughout the entire world, you can imagine the chaos. You can imagine the deaths. You can imagine the economic and the social impact that this would have. And then you start thinking about the fears. And you look at some of the money people and the power people rushing around trying to consolidate and get control of things. Well, here comes a guy riding in on a white horse as a false Christ image to set all that right, to settle the chaos, the dust. He comes from a Western nation because the West is the ones who are really controlling the finances. They have the computers. They have all of the systems in place. The Bible indicates that the Antichrist rises out of the Western Confederation. He's called the man of sin early in the book. Halfway through the Great Tribulation, his title changes, and he's called the Antichrist. Sometime after the middle of this 7-year Great Tribulation, the Bible says that he is killed. He has a head wound that would surely have caused death, and that he is killed off either at the hands of or at the behest of at least 3 of his 10 deputies. See, he came in with 10 other kings to rule. Now, 3 of those apparently were involved in his death. And after this occurs, I'm guessing 3 days, he rises from the dead. And he continues to have the wound, the death wound on his head. And he takes out these other 3 guys. So you start with 11, and you subtract 3, you're down to 8. You see? 7 is the number of completion. The Antichrist is number 8. At this point, he takes control. He takes control as a supreme leader under the title the Antichrist. He is a human being possessed by Satan. It is this time period where we find things that we're familiar with, like the mark of the beast. You cannot buy or sell without this mark on your forehead or on the back of your hand. The false prophet who leads the world, the Western world at least, in worship of the beast in a temple in Jerusalem. And we find these 2 witnesses that are in Jerusalem and are boldly going about the business of preaching the gospel of the tribulation. Men who cannot be killed, men who can point at people, speak, whatever, and they're vaporized. But somehow they are killed by this Antichrist, and they lie in the street for 3 days before being resurrected. And being resurrected, they're then taken immediately up to heaven. My pastor here in Charleston, South Carolina, makes a very strong case in a recent book that he's written for the fact that these men are actually angels. I would encourage you to get the book. But that's for another time. Toward the end of this period, 6.5 years into the Great Tribulation, God seems to be done with unbelieving humanity, done with Satan's power grab. We're beginning to see a grand finale being executed humanly by a tremendous army, an army drawn from several non-Western nations. There is an army from the north. Now keep in mind, Israel is the center of this universe. It would be north of Israel. One from the south, and apparently one from the east, coming across a Euphrates as it dries up, the Bible says, to allow a 200 million man army to cross. Who are these people? Well, this is where the prophecy of Ezekiel comes in chapter 38 and 39. The news out of Magog today is that there has been a coup. That's right. Magog is modern Turkey. largely that region, generally. The president of Turkey is widely believed to have either orchestrated this coup or allowed it to occur for his own purposes. He won't say. But after a few days, President Erdogan was able to regain control. And just this week, he has formally restored relations with Moscow. That, according to Western leaders, as a part of a carefully coordinated attempt by Turkey to build a new power base in the region. What's that got to do with anything? It's Turkey. It's Gog and Magog. It's Russia. It's North. Now let's go back to that coup for a minute. For decades, Turkey, a key NATO member, has said that it wants to forge closer ties with the West, to the extent that Turkish diplomats insist that Ankara is still serious about joining the European Union. But the increasingly hardline Islamist approach taken by President Erdogan in the wake of the failed military coup, which has seen tens of thousands of judges, academics, journalists, military types forced from their jobs, has caused the Turkish government to realize the prospects of maintaining relations with its Western allies are becoming ever more remote so long as this kind of thing continues. This has led Mr. Erdogan to embark on a campaign to reach out to countries such as Russia, which he regards as a viable alternative to the United States in protecting Turkey's interests in the region. These are his words. Now keep in mind, Russia came into the Middle East in a very dramatic and helpful way, for the first time, I believe, to help Syria. Now, in helping Syria, they were helping themselves. And they weren't careful about everybody else in the region. In fact, I reported last week or the week before how that Russia had bombed one of our Air Force, or at least our airstrips in the region. And when we complained about it, I think it was 48 hours later, they came back and did it again. Russia has now moved out of the region in that dominant way, but here we are seeing he and the president, I say he, Putin, and the president of Turkey side by side in a news shot. Well, what's going on with Russia? Well, just this week, the news was that Russian submarines are operating in the Pacific at levels not seen in decades. For the first time since the Cold War, the Russian Pacific Fleet is getting beefed up. The submarines are getting quieter, and they're getting better armed and have greater range. The quietness is thanks to a Japanese company, and I have racked my brain to remember the name of that company, that back in the 1980s, I think it was, or 90s, sold Russia the technology that would make their propellers as quiet as ours. Nobody had submarines quieter than ours. My son-in-law served on a boomer back in the late 80s, early 90s, and he said that the only way American submarines could find a boomer, because they hide with pride, these are SSBNs, these are the ones that shoot off the atomic missiles and you don't even know where they are. The only way they could find them was to listen for a quiet place in the ocean, because the oceans are not quiet. And when they found a quiet place, that's where the submarine would be. It was that quiet. Anyway, according to a study that's titled Russia's Asian Rebalance, put out by Australia's Lowry Institute for International Policy, says Russia's pivot to Asia is resulting in a large-scale revamp of its Pacific Fleet, which over the next decade will go from its smallest to its biggest naval asset. They report, quote, new hunter-killer and ballistic missile submarines have been earmarked for the fleet, which will provide significant heft to Moscow's power projection aspirations. Russia will be operating its new Borai-class SSBNs, the boomers, from its newly upgraded Pacific base on the Kamchatka Peninsula. I like that, Kamchatka. Its 6 new Yasin-class guided missile submarines are expected to begin entering service in 2017, and it's upgrading its existing Akula, Oscar, and Sierra platforms. According to Russian military analyst Dmitry Gorenberg, the Pacific Fleet is likely to become Russia's largest fleet over the next decade, in recognition of the region's increasing geopolitical importance and the concentration of naval powers in the region, end of quote. The Russian Navy is hoping to begin construction of these subs as early as this year, 2016. The goal is to build 16 to 18 of them. Meanwhile, the United States Navy has 53 submarines in its inventory, but because of decommissioning and budget decisions, that figure will drop to 41 by the late 2020s. Putin has also signed a new anti-terrorism law. Observers believe this will lead to a new crackdown on non-government aligned churches. We've already reported here that Russian law now forbids evangelism outside the walls of churches, including the internet. Now, the new law exempts Russian Orthodox Christian churches, which is the only church in Russia that is state-sanctioned. Enter now the biblical prophecy. According to Ezekiel chapter 38, there will come a time when a mighty nation north of Israel, called Magog, will come against Israel along with allies from the north, the east, and the south. Their intent will be to conquer Israel and to consolidate a non-Western region for their own purposes. What they will no doubt not be aware of is the hand of God in their thoughts, in their intents, and in their actions. According to the book of the Revelation, the classic plagues and other destructive events have all passed. The entire scroll that was sealed with 7 seals has been unfolded. All the seals have been broken. There's only one more cataclysmic event to unfold. It is called, euphemistically, the Battle of Armageddon. The world has been prepared in terms of religion. There is a false Christ. It is prepared in terms of an economy. Think of the mark of the beast. There's a control. And it's been prepared in terms of politics. There is the Antichrist who rules with a rod of iron. Cataclysmic events have scarred the earth, changing its topography, altering its water supplies. The heavens have been altered as well, with stars falling and other signs. 40% or more of the earth's population are dead. That's between 2 and 3 billion people. There is global chaos, and much of it is focused on Israel, specifically Jerusalem, as the center of God worship. And everybody knows it's God who is doing this. If you read the book of the Revelation, at the beginning and later on toward the end, we are given a glimpse of what's happening on the earth. And in this particular situation, there are men and women hiding in the mountains, praying that the mountains would fall upon them. This is cited in the beginning, it's cited at the end. And in both cases, they do this because they know this is from God. And they are shaking their fists at God. In Ezekiel chapter 38, God speaking through the prophet says, I am against Gog. Gog is the ruler of Magog. Magog is modern Turkey. In the next few verses, it says that God declares that he will, quote, turn thee back, end of quote, toward Israel. He's talking about Gog and Magog. I will drag you and your army along with Ethiopia, Libya, Persia, Togarmah, which is modern Armenia, as well as many people with them. How will he do this? Verse 4, I will put hooks into their jaws. I will bring thee forth. Verse 10, things will come into thy mind. Thou shalt think an evil thought, literally conceive an evil purpose against Jerusalem. Verse 14, in that day my people Israel dwelleth in safety, and well you know it. And you will come out of the northern parts, a great army. And I will bring thee against my people Israel. And when that happens, keep in mind, God is drawing them into this battle. And when this happens, verse 18, the fury will come up in my face. A great shaking will occur in the land. The mountains shall be thrown down. Every wall shall fall to the ground. Verse 22, pestilence and blood shall rain upon him. That is Gog and his cohorts. Overflowing great rain with hailstones, fire, and brimstone. Verse 23, many nations shall know I am the Lord. In chapter 39, we are noting that only 1/6 of the population is going to survive. And the birds are going to eat the flesh of those that die in this horrific battle. In verse 6 he says, I shall send fire upon Magog, that people group, and all who dwell carelessly in the isles. Carelessly, not respecting God, not doing right. And they shall know I am the Lord. In verse 12 it says it will take Israel 7 months to bury the dead and to cleanse the land. In verse 17, the birds shall be commanded to eat the flesh of those dead and drink their blood. Verse 22, all Israel shall know that I am the Lord their God, and then Jesus shall come again to earth. Now the truth behind all this is that he, Jesus, has been orchestrating all these events over the last years. He is returning to take possession of the property that he paid for on that cross all those many centuries ago. It is an Old Testament principle of possession. You could purchase a piece of land in those days, but you did not get the benefit of that property until you went and took possession of it, throwing off the people that were there. See, I own that land, but you didn't come and take possession. So the person just keeps working the land and getting the profit. But if you show up and you throw him off and you take possession, then you can do that. That's what Jesus is doing. The scroll that unrolls in the book of the Revelation is the title deed. What's happening today is a resurgence in Turkey. And a Turkey that now is joining forces with Russia. The coup is being suggested to have been Erdogan's idea because he's been working to establish a moderate Muslim state, more political than religious. Analysts now believe he's turned the corner, purging the current crop of Islamic idealists in order to establish himself as caliph. His view of Islam features him as the rightful leader of all Muslims. An Islamic state with the power of Western technology and credibility. As I mentioned, ancient Magog is modern Turkey. Meshech and Tubal are also mentioned, and they are regions within this ancient Asia Minor. Tubal is Cappadocia in central Turkey. Meshech is west of that. Togarmah is also mentioned. That's present-day Armenia, even west of Turkey. Ezekiel would have recognized their existence and power in his day. And I mention that because people put these folks up in Russia, Moscow, Tobolsk. But Ezekiel wouldn't have known about that. With Turkey and Russia now aligned, Syria may be in big trouble. ISIS and the other radicals will find a reasonable ally. Saudi Arabia and Iran will gladly align with the Muslim caliphate. All of them will be in it for their own purposes, but they will band together against the common enemy. And that common enemy is the West, and specifically Israel. These Muslims want Israel gone. Russia wants the oil and the warm water ports. If Russia is able to enlarge and improve their submarine force, the Mediterranean will become hostile to the West. If Turkey succeeds in establishing an Islamic caliphate, the West will pull back. NATO right now is weak. And unless you're not really paying attention, the United States is supporting NATO. And we have at least one presidential candidate who says they would pull out. If NATO don't step up, NATO nations don't step up and pay their fair share, we're getting out. How about that? And look at the EU membership. Great Britain backed out, and there are at least 5 other countries that are now talking about it. With a powerful semi-Western nation able to embrace all the Muslims in the region, including Russia, there would be little to stop them. But of course, all that's speculation. What's not speculation is Ezekiel's prophecy. One day, soon, God will call Magog and her allies to battle. Listen to it again. I will put hooks into their jaws. I will bring thee forth. Things will come into thy mind. Thou shalt think an evil thought against Jerusalem. In that day my people Israel dwelleth in safety, and you will come out of the northern parts, a great army. I will bring thee against my people Israel. The prophetic clock is ticking. Can you hear it?